1. Mobile communication methods. Since the beginning of time, humans have transmitted information using means such as voices, drawings, writings, and beacon fires. Since then, the practice of converting transmitted information into agreed upon symbols, and the invention of paper to record them, have enabled the production, storage, and transmission of even more information. The statement that humans are social animals likely means that many people gather together to live in groups, such as a society. Furthermore, living in groups implies interacting with one another. In this sense, the term social human is consistent with the term communicating human. Although we do not know exactly when it began, we have been communicating, exchanging information with those around us for a very long time. There was only a difference in the methods of communication. The meaning and purpose remained the same. For example, before the invention of mobile phones or telephones, people spoke with those nearby, and for those far away, they inquired after their well-being or exchanged information through letters or messengers. They also communicated using methods such as relay horses or beacon fires to transmit important information urgently. The beacon fire station served to deliver information faster than relay horses, at the very least, when urgent national situations occurred. Of course, the content of the transmitted information was relatively less detailed than that of a letter or a relay horse. But in terms of the speed of information delivery, it would have been vastly superior. Meanwhile, people today who use mobile phones communicate in real time with those far away, just as if they were speaking with someone nearby, rather than using letters. People have desired communication that transmits information faster and more accurately, and this has manifested as the development of telecommunications. 1.1. The beginning and development of communication. The breakthrough in the speed of information transmission began with the emergence of telecommunications and the practical application of the wired telegraph, invented by Samuel Morse in 1835. Subsequently, the dawn of the communication era began to rise with Thomas Edison's invention of the phonograph, which recorded and replayed the human voice, and Alexander Graham Bell's invention of the telephone in 1876. The invention of the telephone was sufficient to satisfy the demand for transmitting information that was faster, relatively accurate, and detailed. The principle by which telephone communication transmits information is that the transmitter converts a person's speech into an electrical signal. When that electrical signal is delivered to the recipient's telephone, the recipient's phone receives the signal and converts it back into a human voice to be replayed through the receiver. The connections, such as the telephone line that converts human speech into electrical signals and connects it to the telephone body, or the connection that transmits the electrical signals from the telephone body to a switchboard, or the other party's telephone, were all made through wires. However, because the telephone was wired, communication was only possible at a specific location, namely, where the telephone was located. This problem could only be resolved through a wireless connection, a communication method without wires. The Italian scientist Guglielmo Marconi attempted and succeeded in communicating using electromagnetic waves. This signaled the beginning and the possibility of wireless communication using electromagnetic waves. Although wireless communication became possible as this technology was applied to telecommunications, it was not applied to telephones for the general public until much later. Wireless telephones, which connected the handset to the base unit wirelessly, began to appear in the 1970s, and mobile phone communication, which allows one to carry a phone and make calls while moving anywhere, finally emerged in the 1980s. Of course, this wireless communication technology is extensively applied in environments where it is difficult to install wired lines. Early communication, such as Bell's telephone or Marconi's radio, was point-to-point communication. In other words, communication was conducted only between a receiver and its single-paired transmitter. However, telephone services expanded from this one-to-one communication into many-to-many communication, as many people desired to make phone calls with many others. This was the so-called popularization of communication. To achieve this, the exchange emerged in telecommunications to play a mediating role between receivers and transmitters. 1.1. Development into mobile communication. in order for many people to communicate with many other people respectively. Not only transmitters and receivers are required, but also a switching device that plays the role of connecting the transmitters and receivers. As a result, the concept of a communication system emerged, encompassing not only the transmitters and receivers, but also the switching system itself. The critical functions of the exchange, the core of the communication system, are the switching function, which connects the signals of various people, and the routing function, which determines which path to use for the connection. The emergence of the exchange, invented for communication between many people, gave rise to the connection between the exchange and individual telephones. The line connecting the exchange and the telephone is called the subscriber line, and some also refer to it as the local loop. Generally, subscriber lines are installed as wired cables such as coaxial or fiber optic cables. And in South Korea, these are managed by companies like KT or Powercom. Meanwhile, there is the WLL, where the subscriber line, the local loop, is used wirelessly. WLL stands for Wireless Local Loop, and is a form of subscriber line intended for application in countries with vast territories, such as the United States, Australia, or Brazil. In countries like the US, Australia, and Brazil, individual homes in suburban or rural areas are distributed over far and wide areas, and are located in remote regions quite distant from urban centers. In such cases, because the distance between the exchange in the city and the telephone in each home is very great, it is difficult to install subscriber lines with wired cables, and equally difficult to maintain them. Therefore, there are cases where the subscriber line is configured wirelessly. Figure 1-1 shows an overview of such a communication system. We previously discussed wired telephones, and, in contrast, cordless telephones. One can think of the difference between a wired telephone and a cordless telephone, based on whether the connection between the switching system and the telephone, that is, the subscriber line, is wired or wireless. One might argue that even with a cordless phone, it is only the handset and the base unit that are wireless, while the connection between the base unit and the exchange remains wired. This is certainly correct. However, if we consider the telephone base unit, which is wired to the exchange, as the terminal of that exchange, then the subscriber line of a cordless phone is indeed wireless. The perspective described above is a concept actually applied in mobile communications. That is, if viewed solely from the standpoint of the connection point to the switching system. In the case of wireless communication, the BSS, which includes the BTS, base transceiver station, known as the base station, and the BSC, the base station controller, can be treated as the telephone, as we understand it in a broad sense. In this case, while the connection between the terminal and the base station is wireless, the connections of the core network, which includes the communication equipment or devices beyond the base station, are all wired. While cellular networks and PCS, which is personal communication service networks, which differ from each other only in the RF frequency bands they use, are referred to as wireless communication. In South Korea, the only truly wireless section is the transmission path between the base station and the terminal. All remaining sections are wired. Therefore, when looking at the flow of signals, it is evident that almost the entire path consists of wired routes, rather than wireless ones. Most mobile communication service companies do not own the majority of their network infrastructure, so they lease and use the wired networks of Korea Telecom. For this reason, mobile service providers are putting a lot of effort and interest into securing their own proprietary wired networks. The acquisition of Powercom, which possessed a wired network, by the PCS service provider LG Telecom, can be understood in this same context. This is similar to the reason someone who has been renting a room in another person's house finally prepares a home of their own. Network connection lines, excluding the subscriber line, multiplex and transmit signals from multiple subscribers, and thus use transmission lines of T1 or E1 grade. In a communication system where many people can communicate simultaneously through an exchange, mobile communication emerges a form of communication where the subscriber line is wireless, allowing the subscriber connected to the end of that line to move while communicating. While the development of communication thus far has evolved toward delivering information faster, And in greater detail, mobile communication has added the requirement of wanting to talk anywhere to the existing requirements of conventional communication. In a mobile communications system, a function to manage the mobility of subscribers is added in addition to the functions of a conventional exchange. Of course, the fact that the subscriber line is wireless is one characteristic, but this is merely one aspect of mobile communications form, and not its unique defining feature. Among communication methods where the subscriber line is wireless, there is the WLL. However, WLL merely configures the local loop wirelessly to extend it, and is a system unrelated to mobility. Mobile communications systems establish variable communication areas to enable calls. Even amidst the diverse locational changes of subscribers, these variable communication areas are called cells. When a subscriber establishes a call in a specific cell and moves, the system identifies the subscriber's moved location, and the call is handed over to the cell to which they have moved. In other words, to ensure the call is maintained, even while moving, the cells perform a handoff function by organically connecting and disconnecting. Here, it is crucial that a cell remains an independent and isolated coverage area, maintaining a coverage area that is distinct from other adjacent cells. Mobile communication that operates based on cells in this manner is called cellular communication. That is, communication consisting of cellular, mobile phones, and more recently, smartphones, is collectively referred to as mobile communication. Mobility consists of terminal mobility, where a person carrying a mobile phone moves, and personal mobility, where a person can communicate using any unspecified mobile phone at their location, regardless of the specific device being used. Terminal mobility refers to the mobility of a mobile phone, as we commonly think of it. That is, it is the mobility that allows a person to have a conversation while carrying a mobile phone or smartphone in their pocket or hand. In this case, the location of the mobile phone must always be the same as the location of the person who owns it. To receive a call made to the mobile phone, one must always be in the same location as that phone. This is similar to fixed-line communication, where you had to be next to the telephone to receive a call. On the other hand, personal mobility can be achieved through cards that store unique personal information, such as smart cards or SIM cards. Since a user's SIM card can be inserted into any mobile phone, that phone can be used as if it were the user's own, thereby securing personal mobility. In this case, the subscriber does not need to carry a mobile phone at all times. They can use any phone near them with their own account. For example, they can move between and use a phone in a car, a phone at home, or a phone in an office, depending on their location. Figure 1-2 summarizes the mobility of terminals. In particular, in the case of personal mobility, it can be confirmed that multiple terminals can be used by multiple people. Mobility was categorized into terminal mobility and personal mobility was considered a more advanced form of terminal mobility. However, since mobile terminals like cell phones or smartphones are personal belongings, and the concept of them being personal property is much stronger, personal mobility, the concept of sharing a mobile phone was not a requirement of users in the mobile communication market. Consequently, nearly 25 years after the emergence of mobile communication, personal mobility has seen little practical application in the field. Rather, it can be said that this concept of personal mobility is being better utilized in cloud services used on the web. 1.1. 2. Other types of mobile communication. Communication has evolved from point-to-point communication into many-to-many communication systems that require the functions of an exchange. Up until this point, communication utilized telephones fixed to specific locations. Finally, it evolved into mobile telephones. Meanwhile, there were also cordless telephones that served as an intermediate stage in the evolution from fixed-line telephones to mobile telephones. Examples of these include Europe's CT2 in the 1980s, and the city phone introduced in South Korea in 1996. The biggest difference between these and current mobile communication is the issue of mobility management, specifically the handoff between cells, also referred to as handover in Europe. There are cordless telephones, which were on the path of mobile communications development, and another form of wireless communication known as TRS, or shared frequency. Communication. The device we typically understand as a telephone consists of a base unit connected to an exchange via wire, with the handset connected to the base unit by a cord. On the other hand, a cordless telephone is similarly connected to the exchange via wire, but the handset and the base unit are connected wirelessly. Consequently, a cordless telephone can secure a certain degree of mobility within the limited range where the handset and the base unit are linked by wireless signals. In other words, the base unit of a cordless phone can be seen as providing a form similar to a small-scale base station. These cordless telephones included CT1, which was limited to indoor use, and CD2, such as the city phone, serviced after the pager, which is commonly called BB, which individuals could use in door or outdoor public places as a mobile phone for outgoing calls only. What the CD series of cordless phones have in common with current services like cellular mobile communication, or PCS, is that the terminal's location can move due to the wireless interface. However, the difference lies in whether or not there is mobility management. Because the CT series of wireless communication methods do not manage terminal mobility, there are no restrictions on outgoing calls, but incoming call performance cannot be guaranteed. Figure 1-3 shows the development of CT series phones and their functions. Here, CT1 refers to the home cordless phones commonly seen in households, while CT2 refers to the pedestrian mobile phone system widely used in Europe in the 1980s, which was also temporarily serviced in South Korea under the name CityPhone. Trunk radio systems are known as MCA in the United States and Japan, and as TRS in South Korea and Europe. TRS is a form of mobile communication developed with the objective of increasing frequency utilization efficiency by having a large number of subscribers share a limited number of frequencies. It is a service primarily utilized for corporate activities. This was a common communication service in our daily lives during the 2000s. A representative example of TRS is the method where taxi or truck drivers, or delivery personnel, communicate using terminal devices similar to walkie-talkies. In South Korea, the 380 MHz and 800 MHz bands are allocated for this service. While it offered lower usage fees than mobile phones, it had the advantage of providing real-time communication between offices and field agents. TRS is a wide area cell system where a single base station covers 20-30 kilometers, and it is a method that improves frequency utilization efficiency by limiting communication time. This stands in contrast to mobile communication, which seeks to increase frequency efficiency by reusing frequencies through the cell method. The system configuration of the trunk radio system is shown in Figure 1-5. Additionally, the differences between TRS and conventional walkie-talkies are shown in Figure 1-4. In other words, when managing wireless resources, TRS manages them and their channels collectively, eliminating unnecessary idle channels, and allowing all channels to be used together. Idle channels can be created by strictly limiting the duration of connected calls. To restrict usage time, TRS can be used by accessing an empty channel for a short period without a separate call setup process. All terminals access a common frequency channel, speak for a short duration, and then exit the shared frequency channel, allowing someone else to access that frequency channel again. For this reason, since the receiver picks up signals even unrelated to the user, the secrecy of private conversations cannot be maintained.